My father's voice roared through the phone, venomous and sharp. "You betrayed this family. That house was supposed to be for Leo." I was stunned. The house I'd just bought with 12 years of my own sweat and tears was a conspiracy. They're suing me for $500,000, but they don't know that inside these walls I've already found the weapon that will bring them to their knees. And my name is Mia Jones. I'm 31 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was standing inside my own dream. And the keys felt heavy and real in my palm, a solid weight of brass and steel that represented 12 years of relentless work, 12 years of double shifts, instant ramen dinners, and saying no to every vacation, every concert, every little luxury that others took for granted. But it was all worth it for this. Anne and I stood alone in the empty living room of the craftsman-style house, a beautiful, sturdy home with dark wood trim and a wide, welcoming porch. Sunlight streamed through the large, mullioned windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden fairies. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old oak, of history, of a future I was finally building for myself. This was more than just a house. It was a declaration that I had made it on my own terms. My very own sanctuary on a quiet, tree-lined street in a peaceful corner of Oregon. I could already picture it, a comfortable armchair right here by the window, a towering bookshelf against that wall, the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the mornings, a life, my life. A swell of pure, unadulterated pride washed over me. So powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I had to share it. I had to tell someone who mattered. With a hand that trembled slightly, not from fear but from sheer joy, I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother, Susan. As the phone rang, a familiar childish hope fluttered in my chest, a stupid, stubborn hope that refused to die, no matter how many times it had been starved. This time, I thought, this time will be different. This is big enough. This will finally make her proud. "Stan, hello." Her voice was as I'd always known it, thin, cautious. Mom, it's me," I said, my voice brimming with an excitement I couldn't contain. "You'll never guess what I did. I did it, Mom. I bought a house." In silence, and it was a heavy-loaded silence, the kind I knew all too well. It stretched for a beat too long, thick with unspoken things. All the bright, bubbly joy in my chest began to fizzle out, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "No," she finally said. The word was flat, lifeless. "That's nice, dear." "Nice," I echoed, my smile faltering. "Mom, it's amazing. It's a beautiful craftsman on Oak Street. It has a garden. It's everything I've ever worked for." I was practically begging her for a crumb of enthusiasm, a single spark of shared happiness. "Shanna Craftsman," she repeated, her voice distant, as if I were talking about the weather on another planet. "That's a big step. Are you sure you can afford it?" And the question felt like a small, sharp jab. Not congratulations, not I'm so proud of you, but a question of my competence. "Yes, Mom, I've been saving for 12 years. I can afford it." "And well, okay." Another pause. "Listen, Mia, I have to go. Your father and I are about to have dinner." "Oh, okay." The words came out small, defeated. "And we'll talk later," she said, and then the line went dead. And I lowered the phone, the silence of the empty house suddenly feeling less like peaceful solitude and more like a crushing loneliness. The beautiful sunbeams now seemed to highlight the emptiness, the lack of another person to share this triumph with. A familiar ache settled in my gut. It wasn't a surprise, not really, but the disappointment still stung, a fresh wound on top of old scars. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it didn't matter. This was my victory, not hers. So the next morning, the sun was just as bright, the house just as beautiful. I was drinking a cup of coffee from a paper cup, sitting on the floor of my new living room, trying to recapture that initial surge of joy. That's when my phone rang again. "Dad," the screen read. In a flicker of hope, against my better judgment, maybe Mom had told him, and he was calling to congratulate me. Maybe he would be the one. I answered, a cheerful "Hi, Dad," on my lips. I never got to say it. His voice, unlike my mother's, was not quiet or cautious. It was a roar, a tidal wave of fury that crashed through the phone, so loud I physically recoiled. "And you betrayed this family." And the words hit me like a physical blow. I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips, my mind struggling to process the sheer venom in his tone. "What, Dad, what are you talking about?" "In the house," he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage. "That house on Oak Street. You knew, and you went behind our backs. That house was supposed to be for Leo." In Leo, my younger brother. Of course. "And I don't understand," I stammered, my heart pounding against my ribs. "The house was for sale. It was on the market for months. What does Leo have to do with this?" It's his legacy, our legacy, and you stole it," he screamed. He wasn't listening. He wasn't having a conversation. He was delivering a verdict. He accused me of being selfish, a traitor, of intentionally sabotaging a plan I knew nothing about. And I dropped the phone. The plastic clattered against the hardwood floor, his voice still a tinny, furious buzz emanating from the speaker. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The air was thick, unbreathable. I looked around the room, at the warm wood, the elegant windows, the beautiful space that had, only moments ago, been my greatest achievement. So now it was just a crime scene. So the joy was gone, utterly incinerated. The pride had curdled into a sick, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. The sanctuary had become a cage. All that was left was the echo of his rage and one single soul-crushing question that hammered in my head over and over again, a desperate, agonizing pulse. And why? The question "Sawing why?" echoed in the hollow space of my new house, a ghost of a sound that had haunted me my entire life. My father's words, or that house was supposed to be for Leo, weren't just an accusation. They were a key, unlocking a Pandora's box of memories I had spent years trying to keep shut. The pristine walls of my craftsman home dissolved, the scent of old oak faded, and suddenly I was 7 years old again, standing on the freshly cut lawn of our suburban home on a sunny Saturday afternoon. And it was my birthday, and my father was leading me towards the garage with a grand, theatrical flourish. "All right, Mia, close your eyes," he'd boomed. I squeezed my eyes shut, my small heart thumping with anticipation. I knew what it was. I had been begging for a bicycle for months. When he said, "Okay, open them," I saw it. A girl's bike, painted a fresh, bright blue. It was a little big for me, and I could see faint traces of old scratches beneath the new coat of paint. But I didn't care. It was mine, a real two-wheeled bicycle. "Hun, thank you, thank you, thank you," I squealed, throwing my arms around his legs. And you're welcome, sweetie," he said, patting my head. But his attention was already shifting. "Now just a minute, we have one more surprise." On my mother, Susan, emerged from the house, holding my 4-year-old brother Leo's hand. Leo wasn't walking, he was practically bouncing, his face alight with a kind of pure, unadulterated ecstasy I had never been allowed to feel. Behind them, my father wheeled out a second bicycle. And this one was not repainted. It was brand new, a gleaming fire engine red with thick, rugged tires. It had a tiny flag on a tall pole that fluttered in the breeze and a shiny chrome bell on the handlebars. It was smaller, perfectly sized for Leo, and it radiated newness. My bright blue, slightly too big bicycle suddenly looked shabby, second-hand. A consolation prize. Anne and I stood there, my smile frozen on my face, a cold lump forming in my throat. I watched as my father patiently showed Leo how to ring the bell, as my mother clapped her hands in delight at the sound. I looked from my bike to his, and the difference was a chasm I couldn't understand. I finally mustered a small voice. "Why is his new?" And my mother turned to me, her smile tightening just a little. "Well, honey," she said, her voice soft and reasonable, the voice she always used when explaining away an injustice. "Leo is a boy. He needs the best things to grow up strong." My father nodded in agreement, his focus entirely on his son. "He needs the best." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but as clear as day. And you don't. In that feeling, that cold lump in my throat became a permanent resident. The memories kept coming, a relentless tide pulling me under. I was in high school now, a straight A student. I walked into the living room, clutching my report card like a holy scripture. Every single class, an A. I had stayed up late, studied through weekends, sacrificed a social life for this piece of paper. I handed it to my father, my chest tight with hope. And he glanced at it, a flicker of something, maybe approval, in his eyes. He handed it back with a single, curt nod. "Good work, Mia," he said, before turning his attention back to the football game on TV. And that was it. Good work. On the following weekend, the family Buick was packed. We were going out to celebrate. My heart leaped. Maybe he'd thought about it. Maybe this was my real reward. I got in the car, my best dress on. "Where are we going?" I asked. "And the Cattleman's Steakhouse," my father announced from the driver's seat. "We're celebrating Leo." The boy pulled his math grade up to a C+. And I stared at the back of his head, speechless. A C+. We were going to a fancy steakhouse, the kind of place reserved for major anniversaries, to celebrate a C+. My mother from the passenger seat chimed in. "He tried so hard, Mia. We're so proud of his effort." Anya and I spent the entire dinner in a fog of silent fury. I watched them toast Leo with tall glasses of Coca-Cola. I watched my father order him the biggest steak on the menu. I watched as they hung on his every word about his soccer team, his video games. I sat there, my straight A report card feeling like a worthless piece of paper in my memory, and ate my salad. No one seemed to notice my silence. And the final memory, the one that broke everything, was the sharpest. I was 18, a month from high school graduation, my acceptance letter to a good state university clutched in my hand. I had found them in the kitchen, going over bank statements at the table. It was time to talk about the college fund. "And Mom, Dad," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to discuss tuition. The first payment is due in August." My father, Ben, put his pen down and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. He didn't smile. He exchanged a look with my mother, a silent, weighty conversation passing between them in an instant. "Mia," he began, his tone patient, as if explaining something very simple to a very slow child. "We've been thinking, your mother and I, we've decided the college fund is going to be for Leo." The floor fell out from under me. "What? All of it? But you always said it was for both of us." Leo has his whole career ahead of him. He needs a strong start, a good degree with no debt. It's important for the man of the house, my father explained, his logic unshakable in his own mind. And tears of frustration and betrayal burned my eyes. And what about me? What am I supposed to do? I got in. I worked for this. And he sighed, a long, weary sound of disappointment, as if my ambition was a burden to him. Then he delivered the line that would sever the last thread of hope I ever had for his approval. Look, Mia, let's be realistic. You'll work for a few years, you'll meet a nice young man, you'll get married and have your husband worry about it. That's how it works. And I turned to my mother, my last hope. My heart screamed at her, say something, defend me, tell him he's wrong. But Susan just looked down at the table, her hands tracing the patterns on the wood-grain tablecloth. She was silent. Her silence was a betrayal far deeper than his words. It was an agreement. And I stood there, in the bright, cheerful yellow of our family kitchen, and understood. Again back in the present, I stood in the cold, empty living room of my house. The house I had bought with my own money, money earned while my parents were funding Leo's strong start. The memories weren't just sad stories from the past, they were a map that explained everything, a map that led directly to this moment, to my father's furious, possessive rage over a property he felt belonged to his son by divine right. And I finally understood. In the grand narrative of the Jones family, I was never meant to be a protagonist. I wasn't even a supporting character. I was just a prop, a background detail, a stepping stone, a minor role in the epic story of my brother, Leo. And I had just dared to step into the spotlight. And the realization that I was just a prop in my family's story didn't crush me. It liberated me. If I wasn't a main character in their narrative, then I was free to leave the stage and write my own. A week after that final, soul-crushing conversation in the kitchen, I turned 19. My birthday present to myself was a single large suitcase, bought with money I'd saved from a summer job. I packed my clothes, my books, and the few sentimental items that were truly mine. I walked down the stairs and placed the suitcase by the front door. My mother was in the living room, pretending to read a magazine. My father was in his study, the door closed. Leo was out with friends. Anne and I stood in the entryway, my hand on the doorknob. This was their last chance. A part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, still waited for a voice to call out, "Mia, wait, don't go, let's talk." But the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. No one came. No one called out. I turned the knob, opened the door, and pulled my suitcase behind me. The click of the door shutting was the quietest, most definitive sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of the end of my childhood. There was no argument, no dramatic scene, just a quiet, absolute departure. I did not look back. In the next 12 years blurred into a relentless, grinding montage, a life lived under the harsh glow of neon signs and the dim light of a desk lamp. My new life began at 5 a.m. The shrill alarm would drag me from a few precious hours of sleep. By 6 a.m., I was behind the counter of a bustling downtown coffee shop. The smell of burnt espresso and steamed milk clinging to my hair and clothes long after my shift ended. I learned to smile at tired business people, to move with an efficiency born of desperation, to survive on caffeine and sheer willpower. My shift ended at 2 p.m. I didn't go home. Home was a tiny, cramped studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, a place I only used for sleeping. Instead, I'd grab a cheap slice of pizza and get on the city bus. The hour-long ride to the community college was my classroom. With a textbook propped on my lap, I'd highlight passages and scribble notes. The rumble of the engine a constant drone. The faces of strangers a fleeting backdrop to lessons on architectural theory and structural engineering. And by 5 p.m., I was a different person. I'd trade my coffee-stained apron for a crisp black and white uniform. My second job was as a waitress at the Chop House, a high-end restaurant with white tablecloths and hushed, important conversations. Here I learned a different kind of dance, the art of being invisible yet attentive, of balancing heavy trays, of describing the wine list with a confidence I did not feel. And this was the hardest part. In the soft, warm glow of the restaurant, I was a ghost watching other people's lives unfold. I would see fathers proudly toasting their daughters' achievements. I'd watch mothers laughing with their children, their faces filled with love. I'd overhear families making plans, sharing jokes, simply existing together in a bubble of warmth and belonging that felt a universe away from my own reality. In those moments, a sharp, bitter wave of self-pity would wash over me. So strong it was hard to breathe. I'd have to retreat to the kitchen, clutching the edge of a stainless steel counter, and remind myself why I was doing this, for a future, for a home, for a life that was mine. And every night I'd get back to my apartment after midnight, my feet aching, my mind numb with exhaustion. But my day wasn't over. I'd turn on my small desk lamp, open my ledger, and with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession, I would account for every single dollar. $5 for coffee, $2 for the bus, $65 in tips, $700 for rent, $200 into savings. The numbers were my religion, the savings account my sacred text. Every invitation from classmates or coworkers was met with a polite, "I can't, I have to work," or "I'm studying." My life was a closed loop of work, study, save, and sleep. There was no room for anything else. And then, one day, the loop ended. After years of this grueling routine, I graduated. And the graduation ceremony was held on a sprawling university lawn under a brilliant June sky. I wore the black cap and gown, a symbol of a victory I had fought for tooth and nail. I walked across the stage when my name was called, shook the dean's hand, and accepted the rolled-up diploma. As I walked back to my seat, I scanned the crowd. It was a sea of smiling, waving, cheering families. Parents holding up signs, siblings whistling, grandparents beaming with pride. They were everywhere, these families, their love and support, a tangible force in the air. And my section of the bleachers was empty. There was no one there for me. I had sent an invitation, a small, hopeful formality. I received no reply. And so I stood alone, in the middle of that joyous crowd, clutching the piece of paper that represented 12 years of my life. The loneliness was a physical presence, a cold cloak in the warm sun. But as I looked at the diploma in my hand, another feeling began to bloom alongside the pain. It was a fierce, quiet, and unshakable pride. I had done it without a college fund, without a safety net, without a single word of encouragement. I had done it all by myself. Senene's slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile, not entirely. It was a smile born of exhaustion and triumph, of bitterness and resilience. It was the smile of a survivor, and it was all mine. My diploma earned me an entry-level position at a mid-sized architecture firm. For the first few years, I kept my head down and my walls up. I was a good employee, punctual, diligent, and quiet. I treated work like I had treated everything else in my life, a solitary mission. The loneliness that had been my shadow at graduation followed me into the fluorescent-lit halls of the office, I was used to it. I thought it was just the price of my independence. And then came the Henderson project. It was a nightmare assignment, a commercial redesign with an impossible deadline, and a client who changed his mind every other day. The entire team was stressed, working late into the night under the pressure. It was during one of these grueling, caffeine-fueled evenings that I met Zoe. She was a junior architect like me, with a wild mane of curly red hair and a laugh that could cut through the thickest tension. And we were both hunched over the same set of blueprints, trying to solve a particularly nasty structural problem. I had sketched a potential solution in the margins, a detail I thought was clever but was too hesitant to voice. Zoe leaned over, her eyes scanning my drawing. I instinctively tried to cover it, a reflex born from a lifetime of having my ideas dismissed. "And hey, hold on," she said, gently pushing my hand away. She stared at the sketch for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then her face broke into a wide, brilliant grin. "Mia, this is genius. Why didn't you say anything?" And I was so taken aback I couldn't speak. No one had ever called my work genius. The best I had ever gotten was good work from my father. "Titine, it's just an idea," I mumbled. "And it's not just an idea," she insisted, her voice full of genuine excitement. "It's the idea. It solves the load-bearing issue and adds aesthetic flow. Mia, you have a natural gift." In her words landed in the dry, barren soil of my heart like a sudden downpour. For the first time, someone wasn't just acknowledging my hard work. They were seeing my talent. They were seeing me. It was a strange, unfamiliar, and profoundly warming sensation. And from that night on, something shifted. Zoe and I became an inseparable team. We survived the Henderson project through a shared language of architectural jargon, late-night pizza boxes, and mutual encouragement. When I'd get discouraged, convinced I wasn't good enough, Zoe would be there. "Don't you dare," she'd say, pointing a pencil at me. "Your brain is a secret weapon. Now what's the problem?" When she'd get overwhelmed, I'd be the one to talk her back from the edge, organizing her chaotic notes into a coherent plan. Our friendship bled from the office into our lives. She was the one who, seeing me live on protein bars and coffee, would show up at my desk with an extra container of takeout. "My eyes were bigger than my stomach," she'd lie, pushing a box of Chinese food or a hearty salad towards me. "You'd be doing me a favor." I knew she was lying, but I let her. It was easier than admitting how much the gesture meant to me. And a few years later, my relentless work paid off. I was promoted to a full-fledged architect. It was a huge step, the culmination of everything I'd been striving for. I went home to my small apartment, the official promotion letter in my bag, feeling a familiar mix of pride and solitude. I expected to celebrate alone, maybe with a slightly more expensive bottle of wine than usual. But when I opened my door, the lights were on. Zoe was standing in the middle of my tiny living room, holding a single cupcake with a lit candle, a cheap bottle of sparkling wine tucked under her other arm. "In surprise," she yelled, her grin infectious. Em and I just stood there, speechless, as she sang a clumsy, off-key version of "For She's a Jolly Good Fellow." She saw the look on my face, and her smile softened. "And you didn't think I'd let you celebrate this alone, did you?" she said gently. Tears welled in my eyes, the kind of tears I hadn't let myself cry in years. They weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of overwhelming, heart-cracking gratitude. That night, sitting on the floor of my apartment, sipping sparkling wine from coffee mugs, I looked at this vibrant, kind-hearted woman who had barged into my life and refused to leave. She had seen me at my most stressed and my most vulnerable. She celebrated my victories as if they were her own, without a hint of jealousy or reservation. She had become my anchor, my cheerleader, and my closest confidant. It was in that quiet, simple moment of shared joy that a profound realization settled over me, as clear and solid as the foundation of a house. Family, I realized, wasn't about the blood you share. It was about the people who show up, the people who see you, who champion you, and who bring you a cupcake when you need it most. And for 3 days I lived in a state of suspended animation. The furious echo of my father's voice had faded, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog of hurt and confusion. I drifted through the empty rooms of my new house, which now felt less like a home and more like a monument to a terrible misunderstanding. I hadn't called them back. I didn't know what to say. A small, naive part of me kept whispering that it was just a tantrum, a burst of anger that would eventually cool down. He would realize how insane he sounded. He would call back. He would apologize. I packed and unpacked the same box of books 3 times, unable to commit to any action, trapped in a limbo of waiting. Then on the 4th day, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly, neighborly chime. It was a sharp, insistent buzz that spoke of official business. I opened the door to a man in a nondescript polo shirt holding a clipboard. He looked bored. "In, Mia Jones?" he asked, his tone flat. "In, yes?" He handed me a thick 9x12 manila envelope. "You've been served," he said, made a check mark on his clipboard, turned, and walked back to his car without another word. And I stood in the doorway, the heavy envelope feeling cold and foreign in my hands. In the top left corner, embossed in neat black letters, was the name of a law firm I'd never heard of. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I closed the door, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. This wasn't a phone call. This wasn't an angry outburst. This was something else, something calculated. Izzy and I walked to the kitchen island, the same spot where my dream had begun to crumble, and placed the envelope on the cool granite countertop as if it were a bomb. For a full minute, I just stared at it. My fingers trembled as I fumbled with the metal clasp, the sound of tearing paper unnaturally loud in the silent house. I slid the documents out. The first page was stark, formal, and terrifying. In Superior Court of the State of Oregon in civil complaint. My eyes scanned down the page, my breath catching in my throat. Plaintiff, Ben Jones and Susan Jones. On defendant, Mia Jones. In my own name, listed as the defendant, sued by my own mother and father. The words swam before my eyes, surreal and monstrous. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. I forced myself to read on, to understand the full scope of this nightmare. The pages were filled with cold, legal jargon, but the accusations were brutally clear. They claimed I had engaged in tortious interference, knowingly and maliciously purchasing the property to disrupt their long-standing estate plan for their son, Leo Jones. They alleged fraudulent use of family funds, spinning a wild fantasy that the down payment for my house was money I had somehow siphoned from them over the years. They accused me of infliction of emotional distress upon them and their beloved son. And then I saw the number, the final devastating blow. They were demanding damages, restitution, $500,000, $500,000. A wave of nausea washed over me, so intense I had to sit down on the floor, the cold tile a shock to my system. I leaned my head back against the kitchen cabinets, the legal documents scattered around me. This wasn't about a house anymore. This wasn't even about Leo's legacy. $500,000 was a figure designed to do one thing: ruin me. It was a number designed to bankrupt me, to destroy my credit, to tarnish my professional reputation, and to chain me to a debt I could never repay. They didn't just want the house, they wanted to obliterate the life I had built without them. They wanted to punish me for my independence. The shock was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. The hurt was a white-hot poker searing through my insides. For a few long, agonizing moments, I felt myself begin to crumble. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was overwhelming. These were the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, to protect me, and they had just declared war on me with the cold, merciless precision of strangers. But then, something else happened. As I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the legal wreckage of my family, the initial shock began to recede. The fiery pain of betrayal began to cool, and in its place, something new and hard began to form. It was clarity, a cold, sharp, and terrifying clarity. Then the fog of confusion vanished. The naive hope for an apology, for reconciliation, evaporated like a mirage. I saw them finally for exactly who they were, not as my parents, but as my opponents, my aggressors, the petty tyrants of a kingdom of two, so threatened by my escape that they would burn my entire world to the ground to drag me back into their narrative. The shaking in my hands stopped. My breathing evened out. A new kind of energy, born not of fear, but of pure, undiluted rage, began to flow through me. It was a silent, glacial fury. They had pushed me and pushed me and pushed me my entire life. Now I was at the edge of the cliff, and they thought I would fall. And they were wrong. And I stood up, my movements no longer shaky, but deliberate. I gathered the papers from the floor, stacked them into a neat pile, and placed them firmly on the counter. I picked up my cell phone, my fingers flying across the screen with a new and steady purpose. I scrolled to one name, the only name I knew I could trust. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Mia, is everything okay?" And I took a deep, steadying breath. My voice, when it came out, did not tremble. It was not the voice of a victim, it was the voice of a fighter. It was cold, it was level, and it was hard as steel. "Anunk Zoe," I said. "I need a good lawyer." And after the call with Zoe, a strange sense of purpose settled over me. The glacial fury inside me had solidified into a plan. I had an appointment with the lawyer Zoe recommended, but I couldn't go empty-handed. I needed to understand what I was fighting for. I needed to know this house, my house. So fueled by coffee and a grim determination, I started to clean. Not just to unpack, but to explore, to claim every dusty corner of my new territory. My quest led me to the hallway ceiling where a small, square panel with a pull cord revealed a set of rickety, foldable stairs. The attic. I pulled on a pair of work gloves and a face mask and ascended into the past. The air in the attic was thick and still, smelling of ancient dust and dry wood. A single bare bulb cast long dancing shadows across a landscape of forgotten things. Old furniture, draped in white sheets, like slumbering ghosts, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and a child's rocking horse, its paint faded and peeling. It was a tomb of memories, but none of them were mine. And in the far corner, partially hidden behind a stack of old suitcases, was a small dark cedar chest. It wasn't large or ornate, but it was solid, its wood rich and dark beneath a thick layer of grime. It felt different from the other discarded items. It felt personal. Curiosity piqued. I dragged it into the weak circle of light. The latch was stiff but not locked. I lifted the heavy lid. And the chest wasn't filled with blankets or linens. It was filled with photographs, bundles of them, tied with faded ribbon. Most were old, black and white portraits of people I didn't recognize. I carefully lifted one of the bundles. The top photo was of a young woman, maybe 16 or 17, with a shy smile and familiar, hopeful eyes. She had a ribbon in her hair and was wearing a simple summer dress. She was standing on a wide, welcoming porch, her hand resting on a sturdy wooden pillar. Had my breath caught. It wasn't just the girl, it was the house. The distinctive windows, the slope of the roof, the very pillar her hand was resting on. It was this house. And the girl, with a jolt that shot through my entire body, I recognized her. The smile was less practiced, the eyes less weary, but there was no mistaking it. And it was my mother, Susan. I sank back on my heels, my mind reeling. My mother had been here, in this house. I frantically sifted through more photos. There she was again, a few years older, standing next to a kind-faced man and a woman with the same hopeful eyes. They stood in front of a blooming rose bush in what I now recognized as the backyard. This had to be them, my maternal grandparents. The ones I'd never met. The ones I'd been told had passed away when I was a baby, who had lived somewhere back east. It was all a lie. The pieces slammed into place in my mind with brutal force. This wasn't just some random house on Oak Street. This was my mother's childhood home. The house my grandparents had owned. She had grown up here, walked these halls, maybe even slept in the very room I had chosen for myself. And she had never, not once, mentioned it. So my father's rage suddenly made a sickening kind of sense. His possessive fury over Ihi, the legacy. He wasn't talking about his legacy, he was talking about hers. This house wasn't just an asset, it was a birthright he believed should have been passed down, controlled and given to his son. My purchasing it, independently and without his knowledge, wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a rebellion. I had unwittingly reclaimed a piece of my own history that they had deliberately tried to bury. So the betrayal was staggering, a wound far deeper than the lawsuit. This was a theft of my identity, of my roots. They hadn't just denied me a future, they had erased my past. And I picked up the photo of my young mother again, her shy, hopeful smile, mocking me from across the decades. What had happened in this house to make her want to forget it so completely? To deny its existence to her own daughter? And I didn't have the answers, but I had the truth, my truth. And I held the small black and white photograph in my hand, its corners soft with age. It felt heavier than any legal document, more powerful than any threat. It was evidence, it was motive, it was everything. The cold fury inside me ignited into a white-hot flame. This is not a fight over a house, I whispered to the dusty, silent air of the attic. I spoke the words aloud, needing to hear them, to make them real. I looked down at the image of the woman who had birthed me, and then erased me from her own story. Salmananya, this is a fight for my past. In the law office of Ms. Evelyn David was exactly what you'd expect. Intimidating. It was on the 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. The walls were lined with thick, leather-bound books that looked like they contained the secrets of the universe. Ms. David herself was a woman in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, silver hair cut into a severe bob, and a presence that commanded respect. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Yasemin and Zoe told me the basics, she said, her voice crisp and professional as she gestured for me to sit. A frivolous lawsuit from your parents over a property you purchased legally. Let's see what they sent you. Jer and I pushed the thick manila envelope across the vast mahogany desk. She slid the documents out, her eyes scanning the pages with incredible speed. She didn't flinch, she didn't gasp. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw a muscle tighten in her jaw as she read the accusations. In fraudulent use of family funds, she murmured, more to herself than to me. That's a nasty, specific allegation. They'll have to prove you had access to their money and used it for the down payment. Did you? Didn't anyone know, I said, my voice clear and firm. I haven't taken a single dollar from them since I was 18 years old. Can you prove it? She asked, her gaze sharp, pinning me to my seat. And this was the moment. The nervousness that had been churning in my stomach all morning solidified into a cold resolve. I reached into the large tote bag I had brought with me and began to place them on her desk. One by one, 12 identical spiral-bound notebooks, Ichaninams. David raised an eyebrow. And these are? In my life, I said simply. 12 years of it. She picked up the first one, the cover slightly worn. I knew what was inside. Page after page of my neat, cramped handwriting, documenting every single financial transaction of my first year of independence. She flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. Sound date. Item. Cost, she read aloud softly. August 12th, bus pass, $60. August 14th, textbooks, $214. August 15th, coffee, $2.50. Paycheck, coffee shop, 400 38. And she continued to flip, her eyes moving faster now. She saw the meticulous records of 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs. She saw the rent payments for my tiny studio apartment. She saw the brutal math of my existence, income minus expenses, with every spare penny funneled into 2 categories, tuition and savings. Anne and I watched her face, my heart pounding. This was it. This was my entire story, laid bare in columns of numbers, a story of sacrifice, of discipline, of a relentless solitary focus. It was my shield and my sword. Anonyms. David closed the first notebook and opened another from 5 years later. The numbers were bigger now. A salaried entry-level job, but the pattern was the same. Rent, utilities, student loan payments, and always that unwavering deposit into savings. The fund for the house, my house. Anna, she spent nearly 20 minutes in complete silence, spot-checking the notebooks, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Finally, she closed the last one and stacked them all into a neat pile. She took off her reading glasses, leaned back in her chair, and looked at me. For the first time, she smiled. It was a small, thin smile, but it was electric. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted its prey's fatal weakness. Ms. Jones, she said, and her voice was filled with a newfound warmth, a conspiratorial edge. This is better than gold. They're accusing you of using their money. We're going to show the court every single dollar you earned, every cup of coffee you bought, every late-night meal you ate alone. We're going to make them look like fools. Malicious, greedy fools. In a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. She saw it, she understood. And now my paralegal has already done some preliminary digging, she continued, all business again. The property on Oak Street was listed on the public market, the MLS, for 127 days. You made an offer that was at market value. There are no liens, no trusts, no legal encumbrances whatsoever attached to that deed. It was a clean sale. Their claim of a pre-existing inheritance plan is legally meaningless without a formal trust, which doesn't exist. She paused, leaning forward. They don't have a case, Mia. What they have is a vendetta, and the courts do not look kindly on people who use the legal system to harass their family members. Anne and I also told her about the photographs, about the house being my mother's childhood home. She listened intently, her expression hardening. Anne, keep that to yourself for now, she advised. That's our ace in the hole. We'll use it during the discovery phase or deposition, when it will have the maximum impact. It speaks to motive and a history of deceit. Eero and I left her office an hour later, the city lights twinkling below me. The weight that had been crushing my chest for days had lifted. The fear was gone, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a very long time: power. It wasn't the power to hurt or destroy. It was the power that comes from knowing the truth is on your side, and you have the receipts to prove it. For the first time since that terrible phone call, I wasn't a victim reacting to an attack. I was a strategist, armed with evidence, with a plan, and with a very, very good lawyer. I was finally in control. Then the deposition was held in a sterile, windowless conference room at a neutral law firm. The air was thick with unspoken hostility. I sat on one side of a long, polished table with Ms. David. On the other side sat my father, Ben, my mother, Susan, and their smug-looking lawyer. A court stenographer was set up at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her machine. This wasn't a conversation, this was a battlefield, and every word would be recorded, transcribed, and potentially used as a weapon. Their lawyer started, but it was my father who dominated the room. He wasn't there to mediate, he was there to pronounce judgment. He leaned forward, his face flushed with self-righteous anger, and launched into a tirade. He spoke of tradition, of duty, of the sacred responsibility to protect the family name. "Hen, this isn't about just a house," he declared, his voice booming in the small room. "It's about legacy. It is the responsibility of a son to carry on the family name, to build upon what his father started. It is the duty of a daughter to support that, to understand her place." He looked directly at me, his eyes blazing. "Your place, Mia, was to support your brother, not to steal his birthright from under him for your own selfish ambitions." Ems. David placed a calming hand on my arm under the table. I didn't need it. Hearing those toxic beliefs spoken so plainly, so arrogantly, didn't wound me. It was like watching a snake shed its skin, revealing the ugly, slithering creature that had always been there. A cold, hard certainty settled in my chest. I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity for this man, trapped in his own archaic, pathetic worldview. Ms. David let him finish. Then, in a calm, measured voice, she began her counterattack. "Mr. Jones, could you please point to the specific legal document, a will, a trust, that designates this property as a birthright for your son?" "It's an understanding," he blustered. "It's a family understanding. An understanding holds no legal weight, as you know." Miss David replied smoothly. "My client purchased a property that was publicly listed with her own legally earned funds. Funds which, I might add, we can account for down to the last penny." She gestured to the box containing my 12 notebooks, which we had submitted as evidence. A flicker of unease crossed my father's face for the first time. So the deposition ended a few hours later with nothing resolved. It was exactly as Miss David had predicted, a chance for them to posture and threaten, and for us to gauge the weakness of their position. We left the building and stepped out into the cool evening air. I felt drained, but also strangely cleansed. The final, ugly truth was out in the open. There were no more illusions to cling to. And I went home, ordered a pizza I had no appetite for, and tried to quiet my mind. At around 9 o'clock, there was a soft, hesitant knock on my front door. My body tensed. It couldn't be them. And I looked through the peephole, and my heart stopped. In it was Leo. And he stood on my porch, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked younger than his 27 years, lost and profoundly uncomfortable. This wasn't the golden boys I remembered. This was a young man drowning in guilt. I opened the door. "And hey," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't meet my eyes. "In Leo, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "And I didn't know they were going to do this," he stammered, finally looking up. His eyes were filled with a misery that seemed genuine. The lawsuit, all of it, I thought they were just angry. "I didn't know it would go this far. I'm so sorry, Mia." "Sin's sorry." It was a word I had never once heard from anyone in my family. "What do you want, Leo?" I asked, my arms crossed, guarding my heart. He hesitated, then pulled a thin file folder from inside his jacket. He held it out to me. "I found this in Dad's office, in his private filing cabinet. I think you need to see it." In my hand trembled slightly as I took the folder from him. I stepped back into my house, leaving the door open, and walked to the kitchen island. Under the stark light, I opened it. And the first page was a letter, dated 13 years ago, from a prestigious university on the East Coast. It was addressed to me. It was a formal offer for the Miller Architectural Scholarship, a full 4-year ride, an opportunity that would have changed the entire trajectory of my life. An offer I had never seen. Stapled to it was a copy of a letter sent back to the university, signed by my father, politely declining the scholarship on my behalf, citing a change in my daughter's personal and academic plans. Imke and I felt the air leave my lungs. They hadn't just denied me funding, they had actively stolen my future. And in the next document was a bank statement from a trust account I never knew existed. It showed a single deposit of $20,000, made on Leo's 18th birthday. The memo line read, "Inheritance transfer, Eleanor Vance, my grandmother, my mother's mother." Her inheritance for her grandchildren had gone entirely to one of them, the one they deemed worthy. And the final items were the most vicious. They were a series of printed emails between my parents and my aunts and uncles, spanning several years. In them, my parents painted a picture of me as a troubled, ungrateful, and selfish daughter. They crafted excuses for why I was kidnapped to attend holiday gatherings, family reunions, and weddings. Mia is going through a difficult phase. She's not really herself. It's better if she's not here. It would just upset everyone. And they hadn't just excluded me. They had orchestrated a smear campaign to poison the entire extended family against me, to ensure I was completely and utterly isolated. They had curated my loneliness. Em and I looked up from the papers, my vision blurry with tears of pure, unadulterated rage. All the small hurts, the little slights, the constant feeling of being on the outside looking in. It all made sense now. It was all by design. And Leo was still standing in the doorway, his face pale. He saw the look on my face and flinched. "They told me the money was from a family investment," he said, his voice cracking. "They said you were just busy, that you didn't want to come to things. I was stupid. I believed them." He took a deep breath, the sound shuddering through the quiet room. "This isn't right, Mia. What they did, what they're still doing, it's not right." On he took a step forward, into my house, into my life, His eyes, for the first time, were clear and resolute. "Can I'll testify," he said. The words hung in the air, solid and powerful. "I'll go to your lawyer. I'll tell them everything. About the scholarship, the money, the emails, all of it." Anne and I stared at my brother, the golden boy, the reason for so much of my pain. And I saw, for the first time, not a rival, but an ally, an unwilling accomplice who had finally woken up. As the lawsuit had changed, the pieces on the board had been completely rearranged. The ground had shifted beneath my feet. This was no longer about defending my house or my name. It was a counterattack, and I had just been handed the perfect weapon. In the day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom, feeling a strange calm. The adrenaline had been replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I sat beside Ms. David, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Across the room, my parents sat with their lawyer. My father, Ben, looked confident, almost smug, whispering to his counsel with the air of a man who believed victory was a foregone conclusion. My mother, Susan, looked nervous, twisting the strap of her purse, but she sat beside him, a silent partner in his crusade. And their lawyer went first, painting a picture of a devoted, loving family, torn apart by a selfish, grasping daughter. He spoke of their carefully laid plans for their son's future, their distress, their heartbreak. It was a masterful performance of fiction. And then it was Ms. David's turn. She stood up, her movements deliberate and powerful. "Your Honor," she began, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "The plaintiffs claim my client used family funds to purchase her home. I'd like to present evidence to the contrary." In she walked to the evidence table and, one by one, laid out my 12 notebooks. "These ledgers, Your Honor, document 12 years of my client's life. They show every dollar she earned from multiple jobs while attending college, every dollar she saved. They are a testament not to fraud, but to a level of discipline and perseverance that is frankly astonishing." On she then presented the public listing for the house, proving it was an open market transaction. My father's smug expression began to waver. My mother started twisting her purse strap faster. "And now, Your Honor," Ms. David announced, turning back to the courtroom. "The defense would like to call a surprise witness to the stand. We call Mr. Leo Jones." A ripple of shock went through the small courtroom. My father's head snapped towards the back of the room. His face, once flushed with confidence, was now a mask of disbelief and fury. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. Leo walked forward, his steps steady, his eyes fixed on the witness stand. He didn't look at our parents. He was sworn in, his voice clear and unwavering as he promised to tell the whole truth. "Is-and-Ems," David began gently. "Mr. Jones, could you please tell the court about your family's financial arrangement regarding higher education?" Nan Leo did. He told them everything. He spoke of the family college fund that was promised to both of us, but was given entirely to him. His voice cracked as he spoke of the Miller Architectural Scholarship. "I found the acceptance letter in my father's files," he said, looking at the judge. "And the letter he sent back, declining it on my sister's behalf. She never even knew she had won it." A collective gasp echoed in the silent room. The judge leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Ian, and what about the inheritance from your grandmother, Eleanor Vance?" Ms. David pressed. "Ian and I received $20,000 when I turned 18, Leo admitted. "My parents told me it was from a family investment. I later found the bank statements. It was my sister's share, too. They gave it all to me." And finally, Ms. David held up the printed emails. Mr. Jones, can you identify these? In Leo's face filled with shame. Yes, they are emails my parents sent to our relatives, telling them my sister was unstable and that it was better she not attend family events. It was a lie. They just wanted to cut her off. In with every word Leo spoke, I could feel the foundation of my parents' world crumbling. I risked a glance at them. Their lawyer was pale, shuffling his papers uselessly. My father's face was a mottled shade of purple and white, a mixture of rage and utter humiliation. But it was my mother's face that I will never forget. She was staring at Leo, her mouth slightly agape, her face a blank canvas of absolute devastation. The golden boy, the center of her universe, had just betrayed her. He had chosen the truth. He had chosen me. cold.At. David submitted the documents Leo had provided as evidence. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the faint clicking of the stenographer's machine, recording the demolition of my parents' lies. In the judge, a stern-looking man with weary eyes, looked from the evidence to my parents. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he spoke, his voice was laced with a cold, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than my father's blustering rage. "Khan, in all my years on this bench," he said, his voice dangerously low, "I have rarely seen a case so devoid of merit and so full of malice." Anon he looked directly at my parents. "The claims against your daughter are not only unsubstantiated, they are demonstrably false. The evidence of your own financial and emotional deception is frankly appalling." And he slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking through the tension like a gunshot. "This case is dismissed with prejudice. I am further sanctioning you, the plaintiffs, for abuse of the legal process. You will be responsible for all of your daughter's legal fees." He paused, his glare intensifying. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." And it was over. On the air rushed back into my lungs. A sob, a mixture of relief and 13 years of pent-up grief escaped my lips. Zoe, who had been sitting silently behind me the entire time, wrapped her arms around me. I buried my face in her shoulder and let the tears flow, washing away the years of pain, of loneliness, of injustice. Justice had been served. The truth had won. I was free. In 6 months after the trial, the late afternoon sun cast long, warm stripes across the wooden deck of my back porch. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and the blooming roses I had planted along the fence, the very same spot where my grandmother had once tended her own. My house was no longer an empty shell, but a home filled with comfortable furniture, shelves overflowing with books, and the lingering scent of lemon and lavender. It was a space filled with peace. And I took a slow sip of my iced tea, the condensation from the glass cool against my palm. Across the small patio table, Zoe was laughing at something Leo had said. He was laughing too, a real unburdened laugh that I was just getting used to hearing. And he had kept his promise. After the trial, Leo moved out of our parents' house and into a small apartment with a roommate. He got a part-time job at a bookstore and enrolled in night classes at the local community college, paying his own way. The guilt he carried was a heavy burden, but he was slowly trading it for self-respect. Our relationship was new, fragile, and built on the rubble of our past. We were learning to be siblings, not rivals. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Ihinaise for my parents, the silence was absolute. After the judge's verdict, they had simply vanished from my life. There were no angry phone calls, no pleading letters. It was as if a door had been closed and locked for the final time. I had thought it would feel like a painful amputation, but instead, it felt like breathing. I had drawn the ultimate boundary, not out of hate, but out of the deepest act of self-preservation. Some voids, I learned, are meant to be left empty. In last week, I had received a letter. It wasn't from a lawyer or a long-lost relative. It was from a young woman a few states over, written on simple notebook paper. She had read about my story in an article online. "Chennai thought I was the only one," she wrote. "My family treats my brother like a prince and me like a servant. I've always been too scared to leave, but reading about you, about how you fought back and built your own life, it made me realize I can do it too. You gave me strength, thank you." And I kept that letter in a small wooden box on my desk. It was a reminder that my story, born from so much personal pain, had become a beacon for someone else lost in the dark. My battle had not just been for myself. And I leaned back in my chair, the warmth of the sun on my face. Zoe and Leo's conversation faded into a comfortable, happy murmur. I looked out at my small green yard, at the sturdy oak tree that gave my street its name. I looked at the solid walls of my house, the home I had earned, fought for, and reclaimed. My father had been wrong. This house was never Leo's legacy, but it wasn't my grandmother's legacy either. It was mine. Every beam, every floorboard, every nail was a testament to my own journey. It was a symbol, not of a past that had been stolen, but of a future that I had built with my own two hands. It was a legacy of resilience, of freedom, and of the quiet, unshakable power that comes from defining your own happiness. And a genuine smile, peaceful and deep, touched my lips. The war was over. I was finally home. My journey to reclaim my home and my past was about finding my voice after years of silence. Perhaps my story resonates with a part of your own. Maybe you've also fought battles that no one else could see, or felt that your achievements went unrecognized. And if you feel comfortable, I invite you to share a piece of your story in the comments below. This isn't just a comment section, it's a community of resilient individuals who understand. Your story matters, and you are not alone on your journey. And if you know someone who needs to hear that they have the strength to build their own legacy, please share this story with them. Angten nya sakyantin.